of Founder Basecamp. I'm Dylan Kugler from the Starknet Foundation ecosystem team. Today, we're kicking off our journey together with a focus on idea refinement and market validation. At its core, Founder Basecamp is a structured educational series designed specifically for startup founders like you. We've organized it around four critical focus areas: idea validation and market fit, which we'll cover today, go-to-market strategy and marketing in week 2, fundraising fundamentals in week 3, and then pitch and presentation skills in week 4. Beyond just the content, we're building a peer community where you can actually bounce ideas off each other, get mentorship, and access resources you need to succeed. We're focused on practical, actionable frameworks that you can apply immediately to your startup. You'll get optional weekly homework assignments that provide structure to your progress and are designed to be directly useful to your startup journey. We've also put together a curated resource hub with articles, templates, and tools that are aligned with each session. And then we'll have a community on Telegram, and then we'll also have Telegram bots that will be there to support you 24/7. We'll hold weekly office hours every Wednesday at 4 p.m. UTC +1 if you need personalized feedback. So who is Founders Basecamp for? It's a program tailored for early stage founders and aspiring entrepreneurs. So whether you're refining an existing idea or exploring new startup possibilities, if this sounds like you, then you're in the right place. And here's our roadmap for today. First part, we already went through a brief introduction just to set the context. Then we'll explain why we created Founder Basecamp. We'll dig into problem identification and idea validation, our main topic. Then we'll go into a presentation on tar pit startups, go through some admin info that you'll need, and then finally, we'll close it out with some Q&A. So let's move on to why we created Founder Basecamp, and I'll pass it on to Henri, the head of ecosystem at the Starknet Foundation.
Hey everyone, thank you for having me today. Should I share my screen?
Yeah, it's all you.
Awesome. All right. So I have a very minimal set of presentations because I'm not going to speak for too long. I just want to say a few words to intro Founders Basecamp, why we're doing it, and and my personal take on why we're here. So how did we end up here? So I joined the Starknet ecosystem about 3.5 years ago, and I initially started as a developer advocate. My job was to teach people how to use the tech and how to code on Starknet and deploy applications, which was really fun and really interesting. We got to talk with a lot of people, explain to them how to build cool applications and how to code smart contracts. And then after a while, we realized that we were able to get people to use the tech, but it was hard to build products, really. It's just coming up with a product ID and building products was something that was difficult. So after a few years of working like this, we decided to have initiatives centered around product. So we shifted our focus from devs to product. Hey, if you have a product ID, come and pitch it to us. Come and we'll support you to build your product. And we had a new wave of people coming in. We had a new wave of initiatives, and we iterated and we solved that next bottleneck. So we at that point had a bunch of product and a bunch of projects, but still not a lot of successful products and not a lot of successful companies. And we dove deeper and we realized that a lot of people were really active in looking into how to build a product, didn't necessarily have the right experience or didn't necessarily have the right skills to make it in the real world to turn their business idea into an actual business. So this is us iterating again, and this is us trying to solve this thing. We know we need to move from products to companies, and a lot of the companies early stage hinge on their founders. People who start companies tend to be a bit different. They have good ideas, but not only, they also have bad ideas and they're able to move on from their bad ideas. That's something we'll talk about. I don't want to spoil the whole Founders Basecamp, but my point is that we're starting this because we see a need for it. We see people who want to learn how to create good companies, and so we're here to address that. So the question then is, who is this for? If you're here, first of all, this program is for you. Where like if you're here, if you're in this room, this is already a good thing. This means that you have some will, that you have drive, that you want to make it into this world. But I also want to say that not everybody needs to be a founder. Not everybody will be a founder, and that's fine. You don't need just founders. You also need people who work with founders. So not everybody needs to be a founder, but everybody in a startup needs to understand what it takes to be a founder and what goes into a founder's job. And being here in that room also helps you a lot. So even if you don't feel like, well, okay, I'm not going to start fundraising, I'm not going to go out there, build my own company and do this thing, it is useful for you to be here because on the day you will interact with somebody who does that, you'll understand their job better. Just like if you're a dev, it's useful for the founders, the non-technical founders of your company, to understand what it is you're going through and what are the technical things you're playing with. It isn't interesting for you to understand this. So even if you're not a founder, this is helpful to you to understand what goes into building a successful company. So do stay here. This is valuable. There's a lot of things for you to be here. Then I wanted to discuss a bit like how to graduate and how you graduate from Founders Basecamp. And on this, I want to tell not a personal story, but a little bit actually. I taught in university for a while, and I was mostly working with 4th and 5th year students, so people who were about to enter the job market. And the thing that struck me most, the difference between 4 and 5th year old fifth years, it was that the people between their 4th and 5th year in France, they would spend a bit of time in a company, working for a company. And when they were coming back in the 5th year, they were much more mature and much more like in line with what the job market would expect. But the thing that I realized is that for a lot of people in university, they were used to being graded over 20. So I know in France, when you get a grade, it's over like from 0 to 20, right? And if you have over 10, you pass. And I would design my classes the following way. If you worked for for the time you were in class, you would generally get a 10. And then I had a bunch of opt-in homework where if you spent time at home working extra, you would get extra point and you could get up to 20. And that really allowed me to filter through the people who are just here to pass a grade or to graduate or to tick a box, and the people who wanted to learn more. And then at the end of the class, I would also tell them that the job market is not over 20. There's no roof, there's no cap over which you're graded. This is you against the world, and there's no limit to what you can do. And the minute you understand this, the minute you stop doing the minimum, the minute you start actually just going full on at it, your best self, give it all you got, this is the moment where you're going to make a difference and you're going to start actually breaking through barriers that are holding you back. So you won't graduate from this class. I mean, you will get a spark, of course. We love you. We'll give you those NFTs. They're beautiful. But the real way you graduate from this is by forgetting that graduation existed at all. It's taking everything you got in that class and just pushing forward. There's way more to learn than what you learn in this class. So keep pushing. Um, and then the last thing I wanted to mention is how you can capitalize on that class. There's going to be in Founders Basecamp, you're going to have a lot of content. You're going to learn about a lot of stuff from a bunch of people in the ecosystem who will teach you a lot about the content. But there's a lot of really good content about starting a business out there. We will share links, but there's been over the years a lot of people sharing really interesting stuff about how to do a pitch deck, how to fundraise, how to think about go-to-market. There's a lot of other resources. So stay hungry, go see those other things and make the most of the program, which is which you'll do by connecting with other people. The interest of this program is the people who are in the room with you right now. It's the people who are in the attendance with you because they share the same goal. They're probably in the same phase of their life as you are. They also want to start something. So talk with them. Talk with the mentors. Talk with the teachers. This is not just a set of us talking. This is also a set of office hours. This is an email you can reach out to. This is a Telegram channel where you can ping people. This is a two-way street. We can do a lot more for you than talk for an hour every Tuesday. So leverage this, be hungry, ask for this, and this is how you'll make the most of this program. So I hope to see you all down the line. We're waiting for you.
Thank you, Andre, for some inspirational words. So let's just move on to our first presentation of the day. So as I mentioned before, we're focusing on problem identification and idea validation. Why is this important? Well, getting this right does potentially make the difference between building something people want or wasting months on something nobody needs. So we'll be covering a few different things. The first one is how do you identify the right startup problem? The second one is how to validate your idea efficiently. And then finally, what happens when you're moving towards product market fit? First things first, solving the right problem matters more than your initial solution. So make sure the problem that you're addressing actually matters to the people that you are selling to. 34% of startups do fail specifically because they built something nobody wants. Successful startups actually solve genuine pain points that people will pay to eliminate. So when we look at some famous startups in the past, Airbnb addressed affordable accommodations. Uber solved for unreliable transportation, and Slack was able to simplify scattered communications. These are big problems, and big problems create a big willingness to pay. Once you understand the problem, that gives you a competitive edge that you need to lay into. And we have, before getting into some of the nitty gritty on like some things that you could use for to action on, I do want to challenge a little bit of the conventional wisdom because a lot of times the best companies they don't solve obvious problems. So take a lot of what we're saying with a little grain of salt and take some good advice, but also take into your own advice, own perspectives as well. So the first one, great companies don't always solve obvious problems. Twitter was able to create demand for something new, which is a form of communication that users didn't even know they wanted. Then, as we're looking at other ideas, markets that look terrible can actually signal opportunity. Dropbox entered what seemed like a tiny cloud storage market, but ended up seeing that mobile would end up driving demand for their product. Competition is a positive feature. It validates that demand exists in that market. You just need to be that much better to break out in a crowded space. This is something that PayPal was able to do. And finally, be somewhat careful about relying on what customers say they want. Customers often can't really articulate their unmet needs very clearly. One of my favorite stories is that Henry Ford once said that if he'd asked customers what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. So never undermine what your customers have to say, but do pay close attention to how people actually behave. That will be the key aspect of the majority of this presentation. So most startup problem frameworks fall into one of these three buckets. You could have a solution that targets an existing pain point, which are just known problems like inefficient expense tracking. You could have something that solves for invisible problems, something that Netflix did, and they were able to solve late fees before customers even knew to ask otherwise. And then the final one is an emerging pain point. So we can think of this like Zoom. Remote work tools did exist before COVID, but they became essential afterwards. Each of these types require a very different type of validation approach. So understanding what kind of problem that you are looking for is extremely important. And the best ideas will solve these pain points that existing products handle poorly. They can come from anywhere, but they mostly have, most of these great ideas do come from these type of elements. They're personal problems. When you feel pain personally, you understand it deeply. Airbnb's founders literally couldn't afford their rent and they needed cash during a big design conference. The timing does matter. You don't need to be first, but you do need to be better. So when you can enter a market with deeply flawed incumbents, that can be a powerful feature. So again, getting back to the Zoom example, Zoom is a dominant video sharing platform, but it wasn't first. But it was able to be the best by drastically improving video calls right and at the right time as remote work was becoming mainstream due to COVID. And then finally, the best ideas are often contrarian. So you should always be challenging assumptions that don't match reality. Netflix's DVD by mail idea was absurd at the time, especially as you compared it to Blockbuster's immediate rent the movie. But it resonated because it eliminated late fees. So always be thinking about what kind of idea that you're trying to create and what kind of pain point you are actually trying to solve. And then along those lines, I want to kind of illustrate that this kind of concept of founder market fit, which I think is highly underrated in the startup scene. Why are you the right person to solve this particular problem? Do you have unique knowledge? Do you understand your customer pain points firsthand? Are you passionate about this? As Anlu was saying, not everyone needs to be a founder. Startups are hard, and you do need to persist through it, through all these challenges that you will see. So let's dive a little bit deeper into understanding the problem. High impact problems occur frequently, cause real frustration, have customers already investing to solve them, and demand urgency. So let's consider two of these, frequency and intensity. A problem that happens daily but causes minor annoyance might be less valuable than one that occurs monthly but causes severe pain. So you really want to look at the sweet spot where all of these four factors converge. You want to have daily problems that cause significant pain that people will pay to solve right now. If users don't feel it's urgent, it's likely not the right problem to be solving. And then here's a little framework, a little template, a little worksheet that you can use immediately to just clearly define the problem that you're clearly define the problem, your target audience, the frequency of the problem, the current solution, and the impact of leaving it unsolved. I think that specificity makes the validation and problem solving way more effective. So now let's move on to the crux of this presentation, which is validation. Idea validation is just the process of verifying that your concept actually addresses a real problem for a definable target customer and that those customers will react positively to your proposed solution. In simple terms, it just means gathering evidence that your idea has a market. At its earliest stage, enthusiasm is often high for a startup. You have this great idea and you have this vision of how it will change the world. That's awesome. But reality often does disagree with that. I'm sure many here have poured months or years into a product or to building something that ultimately nobody wanted. So the concept of validation forces you to pause, to actually gather evidence, and then ask tough questions early, which is going to save you time and money on the back end. It shifts the question from can we build this to should we build it and what exactly should we build? And I kind of think of this as a validation loop. This is not a ground-breaking kind of loop by any means, but it is key. The concept here is form a hypothesis, design a minimal test, set clear metrics, analyze results, and then repeat. Keep each cycle short. They should be days or weeks, not months. And you should always be quickly iterating based on actual data. And you validate the problem first rather than immediately building a solution. So again, the concept here is test early, test often, be ready to hear things that you do not want to hear. It's far better to find a flaw in week 4 than to press on blindly for a full year. And as I've been mentioning, really fall in love with a problem, not necessarily your solution, because the problem doesn't change, but your solution can.
Yeah, I have a good example on this actually. When we were designing the first Basecamp for devs, the very first one we did, right? Um, we were wondering, okay, what should be in the curriculum? We should make a test drive for Basecamp, right? And in the first design we had, we thought, oh, we need to talk about the mathematics behind Starks, right? Um, and this was so we did a few sessions, and this was the session that took us by far the most time and efforts to design. And then we realized this was one we once we did it, we realized it was the one that most people didn't care about because it was way too complex. For people to design a smart contract on Starknet, they didn't need to know about the mathematical behind Starknet. We assumed they would, but they didn't. And so here, like doing this first Basecamp round allows us very quickly to eliminate this session and not invest more time in it when it could have become a whole course in and of itself. But even that one for the design, for the minimal test you're describing, often is really like it doesn't, you, in most cases, you don't need a smart contract to test a design or to test a feature. What you need is to see your users reacting to it and you see whether they use this thing. So anyway, just wanted to say that like the design, having a minimal design, a minimal test doesn't need to be trustless. It doesn't need to be the full thing. It just need to look good and you need to see people interact with.
No, I think that's completely correct. And I think it feeds perfectly into the next slide too, because there are multiple approaches to actually testing your idea that are listed here on the slide. And these should be low cost. They should be simple and they should be things that get you to the next stage. Um, so let's just go into some of the examples here. MVPs, everyone uses them. It's a big buzzword, but the concept is they're just experiments. Their goal is to learn, not to build a scaled product. An MVP lets you put a basic solution into a user's hands quickly so that you can actually gather feedback before full development of a full product. So Dropbox, there's a famous thing that they did to validate market interest. They put together a simple demo video uh, before even building anything at production scale. Airbnb used basic prototypes to test user reactions. Then we have a concept of smoke tests, which I think is a really interesting one. Smoke tests use landing pages to actually gauge interest before building anything. So there's a famous example of Buffer, which validated demand with a simple landing page that described their social media scheduling tool and included a pricing page. When 100 plus people clicked the plans and pricing button before the product was even built, they were able to prove willingness to pay with almost zero investment other than a couple hours to build a front end for a web page. Then we have the concept of concierge tests, which involve manually providing the service. So Food on the Table's founder actually personally planned meals for customers. So this is basically and then we can move on to the Wizard of Oz approach, which I think is extremely interesting. Uh, it actually makes users think they're using an automated product when you're actually manually doing the work on the manually doing the work. So Zappos started by buying shoes from local stores after receiving their online orders. So the best validation techniques, the smart validation, will often combine multiple different methods. But the key is choosing which approach answers your most critical assumptions with the least amount of investment. So getting back to the MVP, the real MVP is what users need to get value, not what you think they need. There's often a gap that we've seen between a founder's idea of an MVP, which includes often way too many features, and what users truly need. So remember what I said, an MVP is about learning. Does anyone want this? Will they pay for it? How will they actually use it? Your MVP isn't meant to be a perfect product. It's just enough to deliver the core value and to answer essential questions. So if we look at some of the past ones, like Amazon, their earliest version was just books. They didn't have any complex features, but it provided the core value clearly, and they were able to expand on top of that. And then when to pivot. I think this is a key thing for a lot of founders that are exploring or not getting the traction that they're looking for. It's an extremely hard decision that founders face. So the green flags, strong customer enthusiasm, repeated questions, concrete willingness to pay. red flags are basically the opposite of that. Your gut may tell you to keep pushing, but the data rarely lies. So you always have to be listening to what customer behavior is actually telling you to. So you should pivot when you get persistent negative feedback or stagnant growth, and you should persevere if you get consistent positive feedback and incremental growth. And I just want to point out that pivoting isn't failure. It's proof that you're actually learning and getting closer to what your customers genuinely need. Slack is as successful as any product out there. And it actually started as an internal tool for a failed game. And then they pivoted that internal tool to workplace chat. So again, validating an idea isn't just about running experiments. It's about interpreting these results objectively. And you have to avoid certain cognitive biases, such as confirmation bias, which leads us to only notice data that support our initial idea. So you should be looking to think through what biases actually exist that can mislead our validation, and then work to use evidence to drive our decisions. And then saying on some common mistakes and patterns and some of the negative side, you should just be aware of some of the common pitfalls. You should not be thinking of the solution first. This is just referring to falling in love with your idea before validating demand. As I mentioned earlier, always start with the problem, not your proposed solution. I see this all the time, especially in crypto. There is this concept of vague audience targeting. Everyone is not a customer segment. So you have to really be specific about who has this problem most acutely. And then a lot of people overestimate the problem. This goes back to the four keys components of the problem that I mentioned earlier. Don't misjudge how painful or urgent an issue actually is. And finally, there's a couple other things. A lot of founders who have failed solve for symptoms and not causes. You actually have to start digging deep to understand the root causes of a problem so that you can actually solve them appropriately. And just generally be aware of enthusiastic but misleading feedback. And again, as mentioned, avoid overly complex MVPs. Your real validation comes from actual market actions, not just words. And staying on this line of thought, I think it's always fun to look at why certain products have failed in the past. Juicero, I'm not sure if this is an American thing or it's anywhere else,
It's
but
completely
basically they
American. Nobody knows what it is, man.
well, anyway, it's this 400. Well, most people don't know what it is, other than the fact that it's this kind of super high tech juicer that they sold for $400. But it turned out that customers would just buy the packets and then squeeze the packets by hand, avoiding the whole use of this expensive, ridiculous juicer. Quibi, they spent $1.75 billion on short form exclusive video content that nobody wanted to pay for when better free alternatives existed. Everyone knows what Google Glass is. They created these kind of advanced wearables, but they didn't validate the social accepted norms of wearing such a pair of glasses. So each failure here, the Juicero, Quibi, Google Glass, tons and tons more. They spent huge sums of money without basic validation or how people would actually use their solution. So let these be cautionary tales to you. Remember, validate quickly, cheaply, and honestly, and really just don't let excitement blind you to real world feedback. So once you've validated the core idea and built an initial product, the focus has to shift to product market fit. So what is product market fit? Well, it's DMF is just when your product is meeting a real market demand and customers are buying and using it faster than you can keep up. Period. We can break it down a little bit. You have a good market, which is a sizable group of customers who really need a solution. And then you have a product that can satisfy or solve the problems better than any alternatives. When both of these conditions are met, you get stuck in this nice little blue-green Venn diagram circle. Users adopt the product, they keep using it, and they tell others about it. This is important to note because until you have PMF, pouring resources into scaling is a waste of money. So one concrete way to measure PMF is if at least 40% of users would be very disappointed if your product disappeared. That generally means that you found product market fit. So I have a little pyramid here. It shows the 5 levels of alignment needed for a PMF. Each does build on top of the level below. So we start with target consumer. Have you clearly identified who you're serving? Then we have underserved needs. Are you solving the most important problem for that customer? Your value proposition. Does your product actually deliver a benefit that addresses those needs? A feature set. Have you built the right features to deliver the value prop? And then finally, the user experience. Is it easy for customers to get that value? Product market fit happens when all 5 of these levels align. The right customer uses the product with the right features to solve their pressing need in a compelling way. And again, PMF isn't binary. It exists on a spectrum. You might have PMF with one segment, but not others, or a partial PMF that strengthens over time. And I want you kind of to realize, like, don't mistake press coverage or early enthusiasm or even one-time purchases for true product market fit. The PMF actually does come from repeat usage and real retention, and that's the only thing that matters. And so I'll repeat it. Retention is the clearest indicator of product market fit. Customer acquisition shows initial interest, which is great, but retention actually reveals lasting value, and it is the most honest feedback that you'll get. Most products, they'll get consumers, but then you'll see an initial user drop off. So you want to look for retention curves that actually flatten out, that show a steady and active user base. So how do you track these things? What do you look for? What kind of signals? You want to look for consistent repeat usage patterns, organic referrals without actual prompting them. And then specifically, you want to see waitlist or pre-registration interest steadily growing over time, more than just initial buzz. So true PMF is, again, just kind of like the durable momentum that occurs across these indicators. It's not just temporary traction. So while PMF does exist on a spectrum, many companies do experience this kind of threshold moment when metrics shift noticeably. You'll know you're approaching PMF when you find yourself scrambling to actually fulfill demand rather than desperately trying to create it. Customers ask you for more, your acquisition costs plummet, and you start hearing, we can't get enough. That's the sweet spot that you want to be in. Basically, product market fit is when your solution and customers are in sync, your product is solving their problem better than any alternative, and they actually integrate it into their lives and businesses. So as we wrap up, let's take away a few points. First, obsess over problems, not your solution. The problem you choose to solve is often more important than your initial approach to solving it. Second, start small to prove something big. You don't need the perfect feature complete product to validate your core hypothesis. Third, iterate quickly and deliberately. Each iteration should test specific assumptions and generate actionable insight. Fourth, measure enthusiasm, not just engagement. People using your product is good. People being genuinely excited about your product is way better. And then finally, be metric minded. Follow the evidence, not your ego, and let data actually guide your decisions, even when it contradicts your initial vision. So I hope these tools will help you identify the right problem and how to validate your idea effectively. Now, I'll pass it on to Gyan, who will talk a little bit about tar pit startup ideas.
Awesome. My presentation could be a bit triggering to people who are thinking about building those ideas. So I apologize in advance. But I think we see this very often, especially in the Web3 space. I'm sure we see it just otherwise in the startup ecosystem as well. And I felt like this sort of deserved its own 5-minute presentation. So yeah, just a quick introduction. My name is Gyan and I work in the ecosystem team as well, the Starknet Foundation, and you can find me on X. And I also just wrote an article about target ideas that could be interesting, right? So it may seem like I'm playing a bit of devil's advocate to what Dylan presented, maybe some of the concepts over there, but you will, over a period of time, you will slowly understand the difference between ideas or problems that you're passionate about versus tar pit ideas or problems that will just suck you in and have no future. So ideally, these are kind of problems that, sometimes we feel a huge pull towards an idea or a problem, right? You have heard of it as being a problem for a lot of people and are also constantly wondering why no one has solved for it yet, right? If this is the premise of an idea or a problem that you're looking at, you need to go a bit deeper. That's all is going to be the main takeaway, actually. I've already spoiled it for you. You don't need to step back or you don't need to think about not doing it. You need to go into it with both your eyes open. You need to go a bit deeper to really understand if that is an idea, problem worth building a solution for, right? Because it could be a target. What is a tar pit? The traditional definition of a tar pit is basically, a sort of pit that actually has some sort of petroleum leakage, and it actually attracts animals to get trapped into it. And once certain animals trapped into it, basically they sink and they, die. And that smell attracts more animals to get trapped into it. That's actually the typical definition of a tar pit. So you kind of understand what I'm going to be talking about, right? Tar pit ideas are ideas that are deceptively attractive. Like you feel like, oh, like I want to solve this problem. This seems like this needs to be built, right? It seems like it's a problem that everyone would be facing. But most of these tar pit ideas or all of them are actually kind of unscalable and time consuming business concepts, right? And I've seen a lot of good founders get trapped building these kind of things. And when I talk about the examples is when I think I will trigger a few people. But it is what it is. We are here to talk about real stuff, real challenges that will that you can overcome to become a good and successful founder, right? And why do these ideas become a tar pit, right? What is the reasoning behind? How can you potentially identify? Most of these ideas would be problems that we or our friends may face in our day-to-day lives, and because of that sometimes we feel emotionally connected to these, so we are not able to think about these more objectively, right? As Dylan mentioned, some of the important things is not just how many people feel like they would use your product, but how many of them first of all would actually use it, and second is how many of them are actually enthusiastic about it, right? Think about this. The extreme case would be a product that people are not able to live without, and then a product that people may use maybe say for a day because they would love to give you some engagement but probably never interact with it again, right? And these ideas are like problems that we feel sometimes so connected to that we want to build a solution for this, right? But some of these are just not worth it. That's the messaging, right? And most of these problems or ideas would actually be in the consumer business, right? So it is directly kind of B2C, right? This would be things that would be a consumer product that some consumer would be using. And why does it feel so attractive is because all of us are also consumers, right? Sometimes we have pitched certain things which seem nicer, but we would probably never pay for it, right? And the second thing with consumer apps is that we sometimes underestimate how high the bar is for building consumer products or consumer applications, right? There are so many people who have tried to build consumer applications and failed because they are trying to build something that probably already exists, a slightly better version of probably already what already exists, but that's not going to cut it. So if you are trying to build something which is only a slightly better version or just slapped on the word of decentralization to an existing product which is very popular, it's probably not going to work, right? It is most likely a tar pit idea. And the third thing as to why these ideas may not be successful is there is something beyond software or application that is required to solve this problem. This problem has been existing for a lot of time. People have been trying to solve it, but there are social constructs that could come into picture, right? Sometimes we think about impact problems, and we sort of get very attached to solving a particular impact problem, but we cannot solve them at scale just by building software or application. there are a lot of social constructs around it. There might be regulatory constructs around it that might stop us from building this and taking this forward as a successful venture. That's probably why no one has successfully built it yet, right? So this is how you can sort of kind of identify what a tar pit problem or an idea would look like. Of course, for a tar pit problem, you would find that a lot of people would have tried to solve it. So speaking to them as to what were the realistic challenges that they were facing would help you understand whether you are cut out to overcome those challenges, or whether these challenges are not something that are even realistically solvable in a finite amount of time, right? Now, the last thing is, and I think Dylan mentioned this briefly as well, is that even if you do start working on a target idea, it takes a couple of, months to kind of then figure out that, oh, like this is not going anywhere. That doesn't mean that you are not a good founder, or that doesn't mean that you are not someone who's able to, start a venture, or start a successful venture rather. Let me put it that way, right? So that is a good time for you to think about pivoting, right? So pivoting does not make you a bad person, and pivoting does not it should not make you feel like you are not someone who's able to come up with good ideas. I see that a lot, right? I see people trying out something and then that idea doesn't work. Then you're just like, oh, but maybe I'm just not cut out to build something that is good enough. That's not true, because almost all successful founders probably just have gone out there, put themselves out there over and over again just to talk to people and understand if something works or something doesn't work. If something doesn't work, you you move on from there and you pivot, right? Because the more you stick to your target idea, because of your emotional connect, or because your friends and family, just a close circle, told you that, hey, this is going to be super successful, this is awesome, whatever, like this false sense of, I think, appreciation that Dylan mentioned earlier as well. You're just burning money. Think about that as well, right? Even if it is not a grant that you're spending, it is a lot of your time that you're spending, right? So the moment you realize that, yeah, I don't think this is going to have a product market fit, just move on from there, pivot, right? There is something very interesting about pivoting, and there is there is this really nice thing that I heard, that there are segments where there is less demand but excess of founders, right? What that means is lot of people wanting to build similar stuff, right? There is a lot of founder demand, but there isn't a lot of consumer demand in that particular segment, right? You will generally find a lot of target ideas in that particular segment. However, there are a lot of industries or niche areas where there is more consumer demand, but less founders exist. That's probably because there are not enough skillful founders in that space, right? And these are the spaces that probably are not that exciting, right? Something like insurance, something related to industries, something related to niche that people have not explored that much, right? These are the places where you could start doing some research, start looking at what is happening. There aren't so many founders building in that area. Is it because of a domain challenge, or is it because of creativity challenge? Could you be the person who could be innovative and, potentially gain those skills to build in that space? That could be a nice way to pivot. That could be a nice thing to start looking into in case you're looking to build interesting stuff. And the last thing is that I would say that you would have some sort of strengths, right? Now this is not like a hardcore advice that choose a domain that you have strength in, but as a founder, you know that there are some things that you're really good at. If you can potentially leverage that and build something, even if that strength is something which is boring, maybe you have been, in accounts for 10 years or whatever, right? And you see a problem there. You don't want to go to something which is super shiny, right? You may want to solve a problem in that segment itself because you have a lot of expertise, right? In Web3, however, I don't know if this is like that possible. But that's the thing, right? We are sometimes constraining ourselves, saying that these are the things that exist in the Web3 domain, but and are only possible in the Web3 domain. But what you want to do is you want to think outside the box. You want to come outside of this constraint of DeFi, gamify, socialify, or whatever is just the current narrative. Step outside these constraints and be bold enough to be like, hey, this is an innovative idea, and I think there's a genuine problem which users want a solution for, right? That could have something to do with the domain that you have been in for a really long time. So your experience, your strengths, they do matter when you're pivoting and you're doing research as to where you could potentially pivot to, right? This is the triggering slide. Some of the examples that we see very commonly being built, which are I've got potential targets now. I'm just going to be frank. These are target ideas, right? Likely very hard to acquire customers. Probably no one wants to kind of use them, right? Discovery apps. So discovery apps are generally, there are already a lot of discovery apps, right? Discovering new restaurants, discovering new music, discovering new, I don't know, something, right? The problem that you think with discovery apps is that you are not happy with the selection of restaurants that a particular app is giving you. Okay, you try 2 3 different apps, you're like, I'm not happy with the selection of this restaurant that I want to go to tonight. But the actual thing is that there are only a limited number of restaurants that exist. There are only a finite number of restaurants that exist, right? So even if you decide to be like, hey, I'm going to build a new discovery app, you're still not solving any significant problem, right? The problem is not that it's not showing enough restaurants. The problem is that maybe you, a bunch of your friends, your family, a lot of people you ask, right? They may not be happy with the selection of restaurants, but that's all that exists, right? So similarly, music, right? Like you think that people may want to listen to niche bands or indie artists or things like that, but a lot of people just listen to music that's popular, right? So that's why these apps serve 99% of users and not that 1% of users, right? There is some, and I'm giving you some popular examples because this is not the case with everything, but discovery apps, just discovery apps, right? It's a tar pit, right? You will feel like you are building something, but it is just another discovery app. Web3 LMS, right? I'm touching some nerves here, I think. Web3 LMS, again, learning management system in Web3, uh, it's not something that you can make a business out of. Why? Because there are already so many open source, so much open source material available for learning, right? The problem is that you feel like there are not enough products that are there in Web3 that are popular or that can be used by non-crypto users, right? But you are right, that is a problem. And you think that the solution for that is because there are not enough people who are learning to build on Web3. But the actual problem is that the crux of the problem is that there are not enough committed entrepreneurs who are building long-term products in Web3. It's not about developers learning something, right? There is a lot of open source material. People who are actually interested in learning, go to YouTube, go to some of the existing websites, go to documentation and just learn to do stuff, right? So it's not the biggest problem that you're trying to solve. And then because there is already so much open source and free material, nobody would want to pay for learning, right? So Web3 LMS is a very, very, very common idea that we get, but it's very hard to monetize, a very hard business opportunity, right? There are probably 1 or 2 companies that have already done this and are trying to offer white label solutions and things like that. But it is hard to keep this going as a business, right? As a long-term business, as a product that you can sell, right? So decentralized Upwork. I see this also coming up a lot, right? A platform that will allow freelancers to get paid and companies to recruit freelancers. Honestly, I don't see a product market fit for this, especially in the web. The thing I think we are trying to add is, can we add smart contracts, escrow contracts to facilitate the payment and stuff? The thing is, all of the existing organizations or existing products that are doing this, right, like Upwork and stuff, they have tried to solve, or they are trying to solve for discovery, right? How do you discover freelancers? How do you discover legit freelancers, right? So discovery of legit freelancers is a problem for projects. Discovery of legit projects is the problem for freelancers. The payment is actually not a big problem for most of the users, right? So, but we think, because we are so tuned to think in terms of smart contracts, in terms of escrows and things like that, we think that it is a problem for nine. Think about this. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm saying that it's not a problem for 99% of users, right? That's how you have to think about when you're building products. Loyalty programs, reward programs, again, I see this a lot, but almost every store, every sort of mechanism has their own loyalty programs. It rewards their own loyalty programs. So the problem over here is not that building an app that will act as a loyalty program, as the one that gives out loyalty points, but it's actually being able to bring this into retail, right? Which in itself is a first big problem that we have not solved, bringing crypto into retail. So you are trying to build something one layer on top of that, which you are trying to build a solution on top of a problem for a problem, which is on top of a problem, right? So, and even in general loyalty programs, having concatenating loyalty programs, assimilating them, even in Web2, it's a Darbit idea. I have few more examples that I sort of, got from a nice little blog. I don't know if you can see my screen. Uh, do you see this? It's called
We can
mycanpost.com
see
post.
it.
Yeah, okay. So a roommate matching app, I would say in Web3, I think people trying to build some matching apps. I see this also a lot in hackathons. I think it is like hacker matching app, something matching app, someone matching app, VR, AR shopping, photo sharing, decentralized Instagram. Please tell me that most of you have built it in a hackathon, because I see it so often, right? Recommendations based on friends, anything related to travel planning, except payments. I think the travel part is like, absolutely, I don't understand how Web3 can have any potential product market fit here. Verticalized social networks, building just another social network. Oh my God, like one of those decentralized LinkedIn's, Instagrams, whatever that looks like, right? It's that's the example of wanting to build something that solves a problem, but the consumer app bar being super high, right? Existing consumer social networks have such a high bar that if you build just another decentralized Instagram, it's not going to work. Education, I already mentioned, LMS, restaurant loyalty programs, news curation, personal CRM, podcast, discovery, any kind of discovery is just a target. And peer-to-peer, I think peer-to-peer lending is more Web2 in this context, but maybe I wouldn't say it's really target in Web3. Some scope of innovation there, but it is what it is. It's not just a software. I feel like that is a bit more of a social construct problem, where you have to verify if your peer is whoever legit and all of that. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I just want to share that what I want to share, how I want to close is that don't don't worry so much that your idea is a target idea. Instead, focus on getting market validation fast, like failing fast, right? That will help you get away from target ideas. That is first. And second is, if you find an idea that is extremely popular, a problem that is extremely popular but has not been solved for, talk to people who tried building it before, right? Before trying to put your time and effort into this, that will give you a lot of insights into why this problem was not solved. And last but not the least, right? You should be committed to the problem, as Dylan mentioned. You should be committed to a problem and not the way you solve it, because that's what's going to help you solve it in the right way. But don't also be so emotionally attached to it that you are not able to pivot, right? So sometimes these start with ideas are ideas when people are giving you an evidence that this is not going to work, you get defensive about it. And if you are doing that, then you have to really rethink whether this idea is worth investing your time. Because as an entrepreneur, your time is your most important asset, right? And you want to milk that as much as possible. Time and knowledge, these are the two things that are most important for you. The more knowledge, the more research you do, the more you get to know about what you're building, what space you're building in, and who are going to be your target consumers actually. And then your time, right? How are you spending your time doing what? And I think these are, like, I would say, the most important takeaways from this. Yeah, that's it. Any
Awesome. Thank you,
questions?
Gyan. Appreciate that. Appreciate it. We have a couple things. I'm going to share a little bit on some admin info, but before getting into that, are a couple things I think are important. Some comments that I think are pretty good that I do want to share just here. Raul has a good question on the problem solution framework, but for gaming. I think that's such an important thing because we do have a lot of games on Starknet, especially, but it does have a very different type of approach rather than kind of having a traditional kind of startup framework. But for games, you could actually be thinking of the problem as unmet emotional needs, such as boredom or a challenge desire, wanting to explore or have social interaction, or a game that's relaxing. So, the validating a game idea is how do you actually quickly test whether the core gameplay loop actually can meet these emotional needs. And then Stephen mentioned something on a sleep on it test, which I think is actually quite interesting. And I do want to bring it up to everyone here. Um, I do like that approach. Just kind of, it's fairly practical. It does help reduce bias. And by actively looking for weaknesses early, you're actually forcing yourself to confront the potential issues head on rather than ignoring them. And you would be surprised at how many teams actually build something without realizing that similar companies already exist. Anyway, let's get to cover some logistics so that we're all on the same page for the program. I'll try to cover this as quickly as possible. Um, our regular sessions will happen every Tuesday at 4 p.m. UTC +1, just like today. We'll also hold office hours every Wednesday at the same time. These are optional, but there if you want some more personalized feedback on your specific idea or questions. We do have a Telegram group, which is a central hub for comms, to where you'll ask questions, share resources, and collaborate with other members. We do encourage you to be active in participation. The more you participate, the more you'll just get out of this program. I have a link here. Maybe we can share that link in the chat as well. We have a nice comprehensive resource hub with materials aligned for each session. There's articles, templates, checklists, readings that will complement what we cover. I recommend reviewing them to reinforce the learnings for each week. And then homework. It's completely optional, but is recommended as you kind of think through your idea. We've structured a weekly task specifically to help you refine your ideas and to actually clarify your thinking around your startup concept. These assignments build towards practical outcomes. And we start by articulating the idea and validating your assumptions. Then we'll move on to creating concrete deliverables that like a validated business hypothesis or defined target customers, some go-to-market strategies, and getting investor ready, all the way to getting investor ready material. The first assignment, again, completely optional, is to create a concise problem solution statement. 1 page max. Being concise is the most important thing. Think about these 4 elements. What specific problem are you addressing? How you can actually describe your proposed solution, who experiences this problem, and how your solution differs from the existing alternatives. On this topic, you should be putting it through a Telegram bot and to receive direct feedback on your page. These bots that we have, the links are here as well, and we can share them in the group. They basically simulate different investor types to help you practice pitching. There are 3 personalities. Thank you too. 3 personality, you got the easygoing VC to help you clarify your vision and storytelling. You got your analytical VC, which focuses on market positioning and financial logic. Then you have your shark VC, which really stress tests your pitch with tough investor questions. I would recommend running your ideas through these bots before finalizing your homework. Start with easygoing VC, then you move to analytical, and then you end with shark for the most thorough preparation. And to close us out, I do want to announce something cool. We are super excited to actually have announced just right uh, before this session, this Starknet Accelerator Program, which is a natural next step for teams that are ready to scale. It is an 8-week virtual accelerator for teams that have a functional product with demonstrated early traction. There's up to $200,000 in total investment across the cohort, plus direct mentorship from top crypto experts and VCs. The applications are now live. The link is in the chat. So please keep this in mind as you progress through Founder Basecamp and some of our other programs like hackathons and seed grants. So that really covers it for the introduction, admin. Happy to answer any questions that you guys might have. If you have any questions specifically, you can also message in the group chat. Tell us what you would like to learn more about. And again, thank you so much for coming to the first ever session of Founder Basecamp. We really do want to hear your feedback on how the session flowed. Just like we suggested on this topic, we're going to iterate and we're going to change and we're going to improve it over time. So we have office hours tomorrow, and then next week, Tuesday at the same time, we'll have session 2, which is go-to-market strategy and marketing. So thank you. Appreciate it. Perfect. Thanks, everyone.